The letter arrived in Natalie Foster's trembling hands just as the spring rain began to pelt the windows of her cramped Boston apartment. $10 and a train ticket west, she whispered, reading the offer from a man who signed his name Isaac Irving, a cattle rancher in the Wyoming Territory. It was 1882, and at 22 years old with both parents recently buried and no prospects in sight, Natalie had few options left. "You're actually going through with this madness?" Her landlady had scoffed when Natalie gave notice. "Selling yourself to some stranger out west? I thought you had more dignity, girl." But dignity wouldn't pay the rent or fill her empty stomach. And so, 3 weeks later, Natalie stood on the platform of Wildwood Creek's tiny station, her single trunk at her feet, scanning the faces of the waiting crowd for the man who would become her husband. The journey had been grueling. 6 days on overcrowded trains, sleeping upright when she could sleep at all, eating stale bread and hard cheese she'd packed to avoid spending what little money remained in her purse. Her green traveling dress, once her pride, was creased and dusty. Her auburn hair, hastily pinned that morning, was already coming loose in the hot Wyoming wind. "Miss Foster." Natalie turned to find a young man in his late 20s approaching. He was tall with broad shoulders and sun-browned skin, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his face. When he removed it, she saw eyes as blue as cornflowers and a surprisingly gentle expression. "Mr. Irving?" she asked, extending her gloved hand. "Isaac Irving, madam." He took her hand, but didn't shake it, just held it briefly before releasing it. "Welcome to Wildwood Creek." He wasn't what she had expected. The photograph he'd sent showed a serious man, but in person there was something almost shy about him. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed from work. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, unsure what else to say to the man she was contracted to marry. "Let me get your trunk." He lifted it effortlessly, then gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "It's about an hour to the ranch. You must be tired from your journey." The wagon seat was hard, the road rough, but Natalie was too nervous to notice much discomfort. Isaac spoke little, pointing out landmarks occasionally, the general store where they'd trade goods, the church where services were held on Sundays, the doctor's house should she ever need medical attention. "Everyone knows everyone here," he explained. "It's not like Boston." "How did you know I'm from Boston?" she asked, surprised. A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Your letters. You mentioned the Commons and the harbor. I've never been, but I've read about it." He'd paid attention to her letters. The thought warmed her, though she reminded herself this was a practical arrangement, not a romance. As they crested a hill, he pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is, Irving Ranch." Below them stretched a valley of green pastures dotted with cattle. A modest 2-story house stood near a creek, surrounded by several outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and well kept. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. After years in crowded tenements, the open space felt like freedom. "It's not much compared to city life, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice. "I built most of it myself." The house was simple but clean, with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 above. Isaac showed her to a bedroom with a freshly made bed and a window overlooking the creek. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse until after the wedding," he said, placing her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Mrs. Thornton, she's the preacher's wife, she'll come by tomorrow to help you settle in. I thought, maybe we could have the ceremony this Saturday, if that suits you. For days. For days to prepare to be a wife to this quiet stranger." "Saturday will be fine," she said, summoning a smile. He nodded, lingering awkwardly by the door. "There's stew on the stove for supper. I need to check on a heifer that's about to calve, but I won't be long." Left alone, Natalie sank onto the bed. What had she done? She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a man she'd exchanged only a handful of letters with. Yet there was something about Isaac Irving that reassured her, a steadiness, a lack of pretense. The next morning, Natalie was up with the sun, determined to prove her worth. She explored the kitchen, finding it basic but functional, and had coffee brewing by the time Isaac came in from his morning chores. His surprise at finding breakfast waiting was evident. "You didn't have to do this." "I want to earn my keep," she said simply. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I appreciate that. But you're not a servant, Miss Foster. This will be your home too. After breakfast, Isaac drove her into town to meet some of the locals and purchase fabric for a wedding dress. Mrs. Thornton, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, greeted them warmly at the general store. "So you're Isaac's bride. We've been wondering when he'd find someone to share that big house of his." "It's an arrangement of convenience," Natalie clarified, not wanting to pretend their union was born of love. Mrs. Thornton's smile dimmed slightly. "Well, many a good marriage has started that way." As Isaac discussed feed prices with the store owner, Mrs. Thornton helped Natalie select a suitable fabric for a simple wedding dress. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of three well-dressed women who eyed Natalie with open curiosity. "You must be the mail-order bride," said the eldest, a haughty woman with graying hair. "I'm Victoria Pemberton. My husband owns the bank." "Natalie Foster," she replied, extending her hand, which Victoria barely touched. "Tell me, Miss Foster, what skills do you bring to our little community, besides answering advertisements for husbands?" The mockery in her tone was unmistakable. Natalie felt her cheeks burn. "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston. I can read and write, do sums, and I'm handy with a needle." "How practical," Victoria said with a thin smile. "Though I doubt Isaac Irving needs much reading done on that cattle ranch of his." "Actually," Isaac's voice came from behind them, "I've been expanding my business into breeding specialty stock, which requires considerable record keeping." He moved to stand beside Natalie. "Miss Foster's education will be quite valuable." Victoria's expression soured. "Well, we must all do what's necessary to survive, I suppose. Come along, ladies." As they swept out, Natalie felt a crushing wave of shame. Here it was already the judgment, the disdain for what she had become. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Thornton said kindly. "Some folks just can't bear to see others happy." "Are they right?" Natalie asked Isaac as they drove back to the ranch. "Am I just selling myself?" Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "My mother came west as a mail-order bride. My father wrote to her after his first wife died, leaving him with a baby me. They had a good life together. It wasn't romantic at first, but they respected each other, and that grew into something real." He glanced at her. "I'm not looking to buy a woman, Miss Foster. I'm looking for a partner." The days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Mrs. Thornton helped Natalie sew her dress and shared stories about the town and its inhabitants. Natalie learned that Isaac was respected in the community for his hard work and fair dealings, though some thought him too serious and reserved. "He's not had an easy life," Mrs. Thornton confided. "Lost his mother to fever when he was 12, and his father to a fall from a horse 5 years ago. Been running the ranch alone since then." Natalie found herself watching Isaac as he worked, the confident way he handled the animals, his patience with a skittish colt, his quiet conversations with his ranch hands. There was kindness in him, and a depth she hadn't expected. On the morning of their wedding, Natalie stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself in the simple cream-colored dress she and Mrs. Thornton had created. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with wildflowers Isaac had brought her the previous evening. "For your bouquet," he'd said, holding out the colorful blooms. "If you like them." The gesture had touched her deeply. Perhaps this arrangement could grow into something more than mere convenience, as Mrs. Thornton had suggested. The ceremony was held in the town's small church. Most of the community attended, some out of genuine goodwill, others from curiosity. Victoria Pemberton and her friends sat in the back pew, whispering behind gloved hands. As Natalie walked down the aisle alone, she held her head high despite the weight of scrutiny. Isaac waited at the altar, looking uncomfortable in a clean black suit, but his eyes never left her face. The vows were simple and traditional. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond handshakes. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, and Natalie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. The reception was held at the Irving Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from tree branches. Most guests were cordial, if reserved, congratulating them and bringing modest gifts. But as the afternoon wore on, Natalie overheard snippets of conversation that stung. "Bought and paid for, that one. Wonder what she's running from in Boston. Not like a proper courtship." She retreated to the porch, fighting tears, when a shadow fell across her. Don't let them spoil your day. It was Rachel Morgan, the blacksmith's wife, a friendly woman who had greeted Natalie warmly at the general store. Half those gossiping hens married for money or position themselves. They've just forgotten it with time. I just didn't expect it to be so public. The judgment. Rachel squeezed her arm. It'll pass. Show them what you're made of, and they'll find someone else to talk about. That evening, after the guests had departed, Natalie and Isaac faced each other in the parlor, the reality of their new situation suddenly awkward between them. I can sleep in the bunkhouse again tonight, he offered, if you need more time. Natalie appreciated his consideration, but she was practical enough to know their marriage needed to be real in all ways. That's not necessary. We're married now. Their wedding night was gentle but not passionate, both too conscious of their recent acquaintance to fully relax. Yet Isaac was considerate, asking if she was comfortable, treating her with respect that eased her nervousness. Afterward, lying beside her sleeping husband, Natalie wondered if they would ever feel true affection for each other, or if theirs would remain a partnership of convenience. The following weeks brought adjustment as they established routines together. Natalie took over the household management, planting a vegetable garden and learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. Isaac taught her to ride and showed her the boundaries of their property. This land has been in my family for 30 years, he told her as they sat on horseback atop a ridge overlooking the valley. My father claimed it when there was nothing but wilderness here. You love it very much, she observed. It's part of me, he said simply. I want it to be part of our children someday. The mention of children brought color to her cheeks. Though they shared a bed each night, their physical relationship remained tentative, both still feeling their way toward intimacy. One evening in late summer, Isaac returned from town with a small package for her. Inside was a book of poetry Wordsworth, whom she had mentioned enjoying in one of her letters before their marriage. I ordered it from Denver, he said, almost shyly. I thought you might miss having books around. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. Thank you, Isaac. I do miss reading. I was thinking, he said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, we might set up one of the spare rooms as a proper library. Order more books from back east. Maybe you could even start a small school for the ranch hands' children and others nearby. You'd want that? She asked, surprised. You said you were a teacher's assistant. Seems a shame to waste that knowledge. It was the first time anyone had valued her education since she'd arrived in Wyoming. The idea that he saw her as more than just a housekeeper and potential mother to his children warmed her. Autumn came, bringing with it cattle roundups and preparations for winter. Natalie threw herself into preserving food and making the house snug against the coming cold. She began teaching 3 children from neighboring ranches 3 afternoons a week, finding joy in sharing knowledge again. Their relationship gradually evolved. Isaac began lingering at the breakfast table to talk with her, sharing stories from his childhood or discussing his plans for the ranch. She found herself looking forward to his return each evening, missing his quiet presence when he was away overnight on ranch business. But not everyone was pleased with their apparent contentment. When Natalie attended the town's harvest social in October, Victoria Pemberton made a point of drawing her into conversation with several other ladies. How are you adjusting to married life, Mrs. Irving? She asked with false sweetness. It must be quite different from what you expected when you answered that advertisement. Isaac and I are doing very well, thank you, Natalie replied evenly. It's so brave of you, another woman said, coming all this way to marry a complete stranger. I don't think I could have sold myself like that, no matter how desperate I was. Natalie felt the familiar shame rising. It was a practical decision for both of us. Of course it was, Victoria said. Isaac needed a woman to cook and clean and eventually bear children, and you needed, well, financial security, I suppose. A perfectly practical transaction. Their words followed Natalie home, poisoning what had been a pleasant evening. When Isaac asked what was troubling her, she couldn't bring herself to repeat the cruel remarks. It's nothing, she insisted, turning away from him in their bed. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Was that all she was to him, a practical transaction? Despite his kindness, had he ever seen her as anything more than a convenient solution to his solitude? The first blizzard of winter struck in early December, confining them to the house for 3 days. The forced proximity could have been uncomfortable, But instead Natalie found herself enjoying Isaac's company. He taught her to play chess, and she read aloud from her growing collection of books in the evenings. At night, their lovemaking became less hesitant, more tender. On Christmas Eve, Isaac presented her with a silver locket containing a tiny portrait of himself. "So you'll always have me close," he said, fastening it around her neck. "Even when I'm out with the herd." Natalie touched it wonderingly. "It's beautiful, Isaac. Not as beautiful as the woman wearing it." It was the first time he had called her beautiful. The compliment made her glow with pleasure. "I have something for you too," she said, bringing out a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that had taken her weeks to complete in secret. "It matches your eyes," she said shyly. He wrapped it around his neck immediately, his expression soft. "No one's made me anything since my mother died." That night, as snow fell silently outside their window, Natalie realized she was falling in love with her husband. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. What if he still saw their marriage as merely practical? January brought the harshest weather of the year. Natalie worried constantly when Isaac had to ride out to check on distant cattle or deliver a calf in the freezing cold. When he returned, she would rush to help him out of his frozen clothes, prepare hot coffee, and listen to his tales of the day's challenges. In February, Victoria Pemberton hosted a social at her grand house in town, inviting most of the county's prominent families. Natalie was reluctant to attend, knowing how the banker's wife felt about her, but Isaac insisted it would be impolite to refuse. "Besides," he said, "I'm proud to show off my beautiful wife." The evening began pleasantly enough. Isaac stayed close to her side, introducing her to ranchers and businessmen he dealt with. Several of the mothers whose children Natalie taught sought her out to express their appreciation. Then Victoria appeared, accompanied by a striking young woman with golden hair. "Isaac Irving, how wonderful to see you. Have you met my niece, Eleanor? She's visiting from Denver." Eleanor extended a gloved hand to Isaac. "Mr. Irving, I've heard so much about you." "Miss Pemberton," Isaac acknowledged politely. "May I present my wife, Natalie?" The girl barely glanced at Natalie before returning her attention to Isaac. "Aunt Victoria tells me you have one of the finest ranches in the territory." "It's modest, but it suits us," he replied. "You must show me sometime. I'm so interested in Western ranching." Natalie felt invisible as Eleanor monopolized Isaac's attention with questions about cattle breeding and land management. When the music started, the girl boldly asked Isaac to dance. To Natalie's surprise, Isaac declined. "I'm afraid I promised every dance to my wife," he said, offering Natalie his arm. As they whirled around the floor, Natalie couldn't help asking, "You didn't have to do that. I know you enjoy talking about the ranch. I'd rather dance with you." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Besides, I recognized what Victoria was doing. She never approved of our marriage." "Because I'm a mail-order bride," Natalie said quietly. Isaac stopped dancing, leading her to a quiet corner. "Is that what's been bothering you all these months? The things people say about how we met?" She looked down, embarrassed. "Sometimes I wonder if that's all I am to you, a convenient solution. A practical transaction." "Natalie." He lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Look at me. Do you think I would have sent for just anyone?" "You needed a wife," she said. "I was available. I had a dozen responses to my advertisement. I chose you because your letters showed intelligence, courage, and kindness. Yes, I needed a partner, but I wanted someone I could respect and admire." His blue eyes were intense. "And now I want so much more than that." "What do you mean?" "I mean that what started as a practical arrangement has become the most important thing in my life. I mean that I wake up each morning grateful that you're beside me. I mean that I love you, Natalie Irving." Her heart seemed to stop. "You love me. More than I thought possible." He took her hands in his. "I know it wasn't romantic, how we began, but every day with you has been better than the last." Tears welled in her eyes. "I love you too, Isaac. I've been afraid to say it, afraid you wouldn't want that complication in our arrangement." He laughed softly. "Complicate away, Mrs. Irving." Victoria Pemberton chose that moment to approach, Eleanor at her side. "Isaac, my niece was hoping for that dance now." "I'm afraid I meant what I said before, Mrs. Pemberton. My dancing card is full." He smiled at Natalie. "In fact, we were just leaving." "Leaving?" "But the party's barely begun." Victoria protested. I have something important to discuss with my wife. Isaac's tone was final as he guided Natalie toward the cloakroom. Outside in their wagon, snow had begun to fall lightly, creating a private world around them. What was so important? Natalie asked as Isaac urged the horses toward home. This. He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to her, cradling her face in his gloved hands. I want to court you properly, Natalie Irving. I want to bring you flowers and write you poetry and tell you every day how beautiful you are to me. But we're already married, she said, confused but delighted. Then I'll court my own wife. He kissed her deeply, his warmth dispelling the winter chill. Let them talk. Let them say what they will about how we began. I know what we've become. The rest of winter passed in a haze of newfound happiness. True to his word, Isaac courted her, leaving wildflowers by her breakfast plate, reading poetry to her by firelight, telling her daily how much she meant to him. Their physical relationship blossomed with their emotional connection, becoming passionate and tender. In early spring, Natalie realized she was with child. When she told Isaac, his joy was boundless. A family, he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our family. As her pregnancy progressed, Natalie continued teaching, now with 6 students in the small schoolroom Isaac had built for her adjacent to their house. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Isaac handling the cattle and land, Natalie keeping meticulous records and managing household finances. Victoria Pemberton and her circle continued their whispered disapproval, but Natalie found she no longer cared. She had earned the respect of most in the community through her teaching and her partnership with Isaac in community matters. One afternoon in her 7th month, Natalie was surprised by a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Victoria Pemberton herself standing on the porch. Mrs. Pemberton, she said, unable to hide her surprise. Please come in. The older woman entered stiffly, declining the offer of tea. I won't stay long. I came because my granddaughter, my son's child, is struggling with her reading. Her parents have tried everything. She paused, clearly uncomfortable. I'm told you have a gift for teaching difficult children. It was as close to an olive branch as Victoria would ever extend. I'd be happy to help, Natalie said graciously. She can join our class or come for private lessons if she'd prefer. Victoria nodded sharply. Private, I think. To start. She glanced around the cozy home, noting the bookshelves Isaac had built, the paintings Natalie had hung, the evidence of a life well lived. You've made a real home here. Yes, Natalie agreed. We have. After Victoria left, Natalie sat at her desk to write in her journal, reflecting on how far she had come from that desperate young woman in Boston who had answered a stranger's advertisement. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Natalie mentioned Victoria's visit. Wonders never cease, Isaac remarked, his arm around her shoulders. Though I'm not surprised she came to you for help. You're the best teacher this county has ever seen. It's amazing how things change, she mused. A year ago, I was just that mail order bride to her and others. Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded, yellowed paper. Do you know what this is? Natalie recognized it immediately, her response to his advertisement, the letter that had started everything. I keep it with me always, he said, carefully unfolding it. Because this is the only letter that matters. This is the letter that brought you to me. You've carried it all this time? She asked, touched. To remind me how lucky I am. He placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling their child move. How blessed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Natalie leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. From mail order bride to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, her journey had been unexpected but profoundly fulfilling. I love you, Isaac Irving, she whispered. And I love you, Natalie Irving, he replied, kissing her temple. Now and always. In the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. The creek burbled its constant song. And in the house that had become their home, 2 people who had begun as strangers embraced the family. They had created together a family born not from convention or expectation, but from respect that had blossomed into deep and abiding love.